Well, as I mentioned, welcome here, and I hope that you are all well and looking forward to this time of Thanksgiving. We're going to be spending time in the Word as always, but as I said this morning, I would hope that you would already be preparing your hearts where we can respond. Again, perhaps some of the things in which, as we move through our time as a community, as a body, what separates this from just being any old religious service where you come, you sit, you sing, you listen, you leave, is our response. Not only what have I heard, but what am I going to do with what I've heard? Do I know the Lord, and am I responding? What can I give thanks for today? And we're going to talk about a few things. For those who are joining us, who perhaps haven't been with us or weren't with us last week, we are going through the book of Joshua together, a study in which we are looking at a season of victory in life. After a people circled in the wilderness, they knew God, they witnessed God's miracles, they saw everything God could do, would do, and offered to do for them. And yet, the moment they came into adversity, they treated the circumstances, the enemy, the trial, as if there were no God. And this morning, we're going to be looking at a tale of two reports. And we're going to be pressing on in Joshua, and you'll see as we move forward how we're going to kind of turn that and look this morning at what is a Thanksgiving message. And you'll understand in a moment. Again, probably not words or thoughts that are new to you, but again, hoping to really highlight what's true more than anything else. And so as we begin together, I'm going to be opening to Joshua and chapter 2. And so you can turn there with me if you'd like to follow along. Otherwise, you can listen, and I'll be reading. And as we pick up where we left off, remember, and again, just to remember where we've been so that we know where we're going, we've looked at the fact that Joshua was called. And he was called, and several times we've read, Joshua, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That was a promise. And Joshua was being told he was going to be led into a new season that was going to require both strength and courage. He was going to be facing new enemies, new circumstances, new situations, but in all of it, God would be with them. God would have them. He would keep them. And everywhere they went, he was with them. Joshua then was going to tell the commanders of the people as he passed through the camp. And we mentioned last week that the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they were told that while they were in the land that they were to be given as an inheritance, they were not to stay there, but they were to get up and send all of their military men on with the rest of the brethren in order to fight. And last week we looked at the fact that while I look at salvation as a whole, it's not all about me. In fact, it is a journey that is about community. And I'm not only called to fight for the Lord and before the Lord, but for one another in the Lord. And so we looked at the fact that they were not to enjoy that rest until the battle had been won for all, not just themselves. Well, as we read on in the book of Joshua this morning, we're in chapter 2, and we may be reading the familiar verses of Rahab, who hid the spies. Now, next week, we're going to dive into Rahab because she is a fascinating character that God chose to use. And we're going to gain some context in Rahab's walk and life this morning. But what I'm going to hone in on is a few words that come afterwards. And then next Sunday, we're going to go back and really focus on what's happening there and in that situation with Rahab and the circumstances that she found herself in. It says in chapter 2, that Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab and lodged there. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who've come to you, who've entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the two men, hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof, hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. The men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the fords, and as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now these spies were hidden by Rahab. Rahab would talk to them and ask them if they would please save her and her family, because she knew that the God of life, the living Lord, was with them and using them. And she actually tells them that when they heard the Israelites were coming and what God had done to the Egyptians through them, that all of their hearts melted within them. They make a promise to Rahab, and they wait until those who went searching for them came back. So they already thought that they had left. And then, when not being looked for, they would go back to report what had happened. Verse 22 in the book of Joshua. And remember, next week we're going to dive into the full in some very challenging verses. But for this morning, verse 22 of Joshua and chapter 2. They departed and came to the hill country and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but had not found them. Then the two men returned, came down from the hill country, crossed over, and came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and they related to him all that had happened to them. Now I want to stop there. Though we are going to read further, we're about to read a report that the spies were going to give Joshua, the son of Nun, who had sent them to spy out the land. Before we read these next words, because their report is so important today, before we read, I want to go back all the way to a book called Numbers, in which they were numbering the people before entering the land some 40 years previous. And I want to remind you that Moses himself, 40 years earlier, had sent out a group of people, the heads of all Israel, and they were to go out and spy out the land. And he gave them instructions. I want you to bring back some of the fruit of the land in Numbers 13. He told them, I want you to tell me about the land. Is it fertile? Are there trees? Are the cities fortified? How many towns? They were to go out and tell them everything they could find about this great land that God had promised all the way from the beginning to their great forefather Abraham, that they would one day have as their own. A promise that was reiterated in Moses, and they were told, go and get it, for I have given it. The spies in Numbers 13 would go out, and in like manner they would walk through the land, they would search it out, they would see it, but as they walked through it, it tells us, verse 23 in Numbers 13. Again, I'm reading quickly for time's sake, but I hope you can follow at least the storyline, if not along with me in your own Bible. It says they came to the valley of Eshcol. Again, Numbers 13, verse 23. They came to the valley of Eshcol. From there, cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Verse 28, Numbers 13, nevertheless, The people who live in the land are strong. The cities are fortified, and they are very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites living in the hill country. The Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." Why was Caleb so confident? They saw it. They saw the fruit. They saw the obstacle. They saw the difficulty. They even saw the giants. And Caleb said, "By all means, let's go get it. Let's go." But listen to what they say. But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against this people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land. And they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone in spying out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There are also the Nephilim, sons of Anak there, giants. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." All the congregation lifted up their voices, cried out, and wept that night. You see, we're reading in the book of Joshua the second time a report from spies who were reporting what they saw. And you know what? They saw the same things. Fortified cities, strong enemies. And I want you this morning, if there's anything we can focus on or hone in on, it's the difference between the report of the spies in Numbers 13 and those who spied out the land, the city of Jericho, in Joshua chapter 2. Listen to what it says in verse 23. The two men returned and came down from the hill country, crossed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun. They related to him all that happened to them. They said to Joshua, "Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us." What's the difference? What's the difference? One report in our tale of two reports, one report simply saw the enemy, the obstacle, the difficulty, the war that was going to happen, not only within, because they feared, but the one without, with all those fortified giants that were within the land. Oh, the fruit was good, but those who seemed to be protecting it, great in size and number. What's the difference in Joshua chapter 2? Though they saw much the same thing, narrowly escaped with their own lives, here's what they said. The men returned from the hill country, crossed over, spoke with Joshua. Verse 24, and this is one of those ones I've triple highlighted until the ink bleeds through, either to Revelation or to Genesis, whichever side of the page it might be on. Here's what they said. "Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. The inhabitants of the land have melted away before us." In their mind, what did they see? Oh, they saw enemy, but in their minds, the victory had already been won. Notice the wording. The Lord has given. Not will give, not might give. What? Has given. Isn't that beautiful? The change in attitude is not following a God who might grant victory. They knew a God who had promised and from the beginning of time had already provided the victory. He has given it. They've already melted. We're going to walk in and take it, not because we're big, not because we're great, but because the God who is with us is greater, far greater than we could ever ask or imagine. It's not even for us to go and take it. It's already been taken. Let's go get it. You see, one report led to circling in the wilderness for 40 years, looking at a promised land from the outside, longing for what lied within. Circling. Why? Hebrews tells us. Because while they had the report, good news, it was not received with a heart of faith. They wanted it, but they couldn't believe that the God who was big enough to get them out of Egypt, to give them bread when they had none, to give them water when they thirsted in the desert, somehow that God was not big enough to defeat the enemy who seemed so great beyond those borders. But after a whole generation died wandering in the wilderness, here's Joshua, and the spies return, and the words, it's already been done. We're simply walking in to receive what he's already given. Do you know what? We've been walking through, in our Tuesday evening Bible studies, the Gospel of Mark. And we've been witnessing how often, as we've been going through on Zoom together, we've been witnessing how often Jesus spoke plainly. And we keep hearing those words. From that time on, he spoke of his death, his need to suffer, and his resurrection plainly. And yet, do you know what happened? I remind you of this, and it's often at Passover that we speak of it. In Easter, I'll never forget the fact that after Jesus died, even though he had told them, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, but I am going to rise again. It was those very disciples who heard his every word, who on the day of his resurrection came running to a tomb when they heard that the stone had been rolled away. And when it had been rolled away, what did they say? With weeping, who has taken the body of our Lord? You see, they came to the tomb looking for a dead Jesus, one that had died, but not risen again. You see, if they had been listening, if they had truly been listening, they would have come to that tomb that morning, what? Not expecting a Jesus defeated by death, but what? Praising a God who resides over death itself. They could have come rejoicing, knowing that they were coming to find a Jesus alive, not one who had simply suffered unto death. And I wonder today how often I'm the great and grand pessimist of my own walk, who sees a situation and find myself serving an already defeated battle. And it's not because I'm big enough to beat it, but for some reason this seems so much grander or greater. The God who saved me last time, why do I think not able to save me this time? The God who swallows Egyptian armies, all of a sudden now, seemingly so small and compared to giants. God never changed. God's faithfulness, even when we are unfaithful, what? Faithful through and through. But I find, oftentimes, like looking through that screen window, right? When you look at the screen and you fixate and focus on what's closest to you, it's all you can see with a green blur in the background. And I love fixating on the obstacle, on the difficulty, on the trial. And I love to whine and moan, and God, why me? And why now? And why this? God, save me from my circumstance. And I forget that time and again, God's not the God of simply removing you from the trials of circumstance. He's the God that wants to prove himself by saving you in the midst of them. The one who wants to be your strength when you are weak. The one that wants to provide his wealth of riches when you are in great poverty. The one who wants to bring you companionship when you are lonely. The one who wants to bring you wisdom when you've been found foolish. This is the God who wants to be seen as God in the midst of our humanity. What? As we read in Corinthians, Paul writes, I have placed this heavenly treasure in what? Earthen vessels, jars of clay. Why? So that my surpassing greatness might be seen of me and not of you. God chose weak vessels. Go back and read. Why did he choose Israel? He tells them in the book of Deuteronomy, I did not choose you because you were the greatest in number. I did not choose you because you were the strongest. In fact, you were the weakest. You were the smallest. And you know what God says? I need to be glorified today. Who could I use? How about that weak little tribe over there? What better vessel to bestow my glory upon that whenever they win a battle, everyone will stand and stop and go, only God's the answer. Oh, how about that foolish one over there? Wouldn't it be amazing if when they utter words of wisdom, everyone would have to go, how? Only God, that's how. And isn't that it? That's why he said, Paul, who had the pedigree, a Jew of Jews, he was more religious than the utterly religious. And yet when God chose, who's going to go to my people? Israel. God says, Paul, you have every platform, every respect. In fact, even you were a persecutor and you were holding the coats while they stoned Stephen. In fact, if there was anyone who could evangelize and tell people the truth within the people of Israel, you'd be the one. But I'm afraid I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. I want you to go to the people who don't give a rip about your education, your background. I'm going to send you to people who don't care about anything you are or have been. And Paul might have been like, Lord, yeah, but what about the Jews? Here's God. Yeah, don't worry, I've got them covered. I've got an idiot fisherman who talks funny, and he's going to go to the Jews. Right? Do you remember when he'd open his mouth, they'd all go, who is this unlearned man? And why is he speaking words of wisdom? I mean, what an incredible role reversal. And yet that's the God we serve, who wants to be glorified in the midst of our weakness, who wants to show his ability in the midst of our inability. But here's what I do. I see the obstacle. God, I can't do it. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. That's report number 1, Numbers 13. And you know what? God can work with that because in essence, that's the building blocks to moving forward in God's economy and kingdom. You first have to know that you can't before you can understand that he can. But here's where it goes off the rails. The moment you go from I can't and turn over and go, God, I'd hate to say it, but you can't either. And now I sit here whining and bemoaning because I haven't made it. No, I need to see my weakness, my inability, my foolishness, my impoverity. But I need to turn to the God who has both promised and is faithful. And don't say what if or what might, but what is. When's the last time you felt inadequate? I'm thinking of a situation in my own life, and I've told you guys so many stories. how our farm on Vancouver Island leads us into so many circumstances or situations where I say things like, God, there's someone I long to know you and your love. But here's how I feel. Inadequate. Inadequate. Inadequate to say anything, share anything. And sometimes even when I do muster up the strength, I only feel like I fall on my face. When's the last time you turned and said, Lord, thank you. Thank you because I'm inadequate, but I know you are. And as much as I would like to tell them, convince them, or show them, I can't. But I know you can, and here's what I do know. You love them even more than I do, and all this time you've been planting seeds. I may not see it, I may even not know it or see any evidence of it in this moment, but you're working. You're working. Thank you. Thank you, because you are above and beyond all I ask or imagine. Those are those moments, and again, forgive me for sharing past examples that you've heard before, but I'll share it again because it's timely for me to remember. Sometimes I'm just standing up here talking to myself, and you have to listen in. I'm sorry. At least the people on the internet can kind of just click out when they're tired and fall asleep. But you guys are captive. Well, you can run out too. The doors are open. But listen, remember how I told you a year or two ago that one farmer who mocked me all the time? He was the atheist. He was the man who, if anyone, loud, outspoken, like, oh, you're one of those religious fellows. Like every time, just felt the lesser man when I had to talk to him. And I found myself coming out of a church service in a collared shirt and dress pants with fancy shoes, and there's nothing more embarrassing than showing up on another man's farm looking fancy. I'll tell you that right now. It's embarrassing. But I had to buy baler twine from this man, and I needed it now, and so out of church and onto his farm. And you know what? After so many failures and me fretting, and here's what was going through my mind. Do I take off the collared shirt? Do I have some boots in the back? What could I do to lessen the criticism as I go there on a Sunday afternoon? I'm trying to figure out what I can do. This is Pastor Steve, right? Genuinely, what can I do to lessen the criticism? How can I alter my appearance? And then I say this, Lord, I'm an idiot. Why do I always assume you haven't gone before me? Why do I assume that you're not there? And I said, Lord, thank you. Because you've got this guy. And whether I'm ridiculed or not, you know. And I can just thank you that you're in this situation, and all I can do is be a light. And you know what happened? I got out of my car. Here's him and his young daughter cleaning hay equipment. And I was looking fancy, but it doesn't matter. When you see another farmer working, you get in. I grabbed a knife, started helping them clean the hay equipment. And these are the words out of his mouth. Honey, you should ask Steve that question. He's a spiritual guy. And I'm like, that's the last thing I thought I'd hear, right? And for those who remember me telling you some time ago, the next words, I'm like, what? I don't know if I'd call myself that spiritual, but I'm happy to listen to what you have to say. And out came the story. A young lady married, lost her husband, a widow at a young age with 2 kids. And here she is, struggling because her husband was a Christian, she wasn't, and the grandparents on his side were pressuring her to get her kids baptized so they would see her husband in heaven when they got there. And she said, I'm being pressured to baptize my kids. Here's my question. I go in the lake all the time. Can I not just jump in the lake? Can I not just send my kids swimming? And I was like, oh, I feel so bad for you. I said, because this is so awful. I said, listen, I feel bad because baptism doesn't save you. That's an outward symbol of an inward change of heart. And the fact that you're getting pressured to do a religious ceremony before the heart is there isn't right. That's wrong. And I went on to say, listen, this is what baptism is. You go under the water because like Jesus, you're prepared to die to self, but you're brought back up because you want to live in Christ. It's an outward reflection of what you've done inside. And she goes, yeah, but what about the lake? And I said, it's not about the water. And this was the best part. When the atheist farmer father turns to his daughter and says, honey, you're not getting it. He's saying it's a symbol of a change of heart. It's about a relationship with God is what he's saying. And I just I fell over laughing. Why? Because it was stupid. Here I was fretting and fearing and fighting, and maybe I should pick it up on Monday instead. Why did it take so much for me to stop and say, what? Thank you, God. Why do I always assume the battle's lost instead of won in advance? Why do I always assume you're not there instead of giving thanks because I know your presence is there? Why do I always fall short? And you know what, this morning? And you're like, Steve, you are as long-winded as they come, because really we're honing in on one thing. A group of people who saw the land, they saw the enemy, they saw the fight to come. And yet, when they came back, they had one report. The battle is already won. The Lord has given all the land into our hands. Today, I'm going to ask you a question. Where have we ceased to give thanks in advance? What are the situations where the obstacle seems not only too great for me, that's actually a good thing to know, but I failed and have firmly, maybe I don't say it, but in my actions and heart, I may well be walking by believing it, that the circumstances is too big for God too. What relationship seems too broken? What need too costly? What weakness too great to overcome? What hardship too difficult? What season of life? What addiction too hard to break? What is too big? And it doesn't mean there's not going to be a fight nor bloodshed. But here's what it means, that today we can actually give thanks in advance for the God who is above and beyond. Not looking for a dead Jesus, but one who's alive and well. Not defeated, but dominating. At what point in place do we stop complaining? Complaining, just one of the symptoms of an unthankful heart that is losing faith in a faithful King. Today, God is big enough, and it doesn't mean that He's not going to bring you through the fight. I was thinking this week as talking with a friend about Mary and Joseph. Like, can you imagine the number of defeats? We've spoken recently where it's, man, here Joseph finds out in maybe an untimely way that the woman he's engaged to is pregnant, right? And he's trying to divorce her quietly. And that's when God comes down and says, hey, Joseph, don't worry. I've got this. I'm in it. It's me. You can go. Only to find out, oh, by the way, she's pregnant. You're not going to divorce her. Now they're going to collect taxes. Now they're going to do a registry of all the people. Now you got to walk to Bethlehem. Okay, thank you. Pregnant wife, walking to Bethlehem. Now you get there. Now there's nowhere to stay. Much to be thankful for? Problem after problem, defeat after defeat, or so it seemed. If they had their heart in the right place, here's what they would have said, and perhaps they did, because we know the Lord chose them because their heart was wholly His. God, I don't understand this. We seem to hit obstacle after obstacle. And yet I know that you are good, and I know that you are in this, and somehow I know that you are part of this. How would it have changed their perspective if they knew that in the midst of all these trials and difficulties and tribulations, here's God steering them into the town of Bethlehem, into a manger, because it had been prophesied that that's where the Savior would be born. Oh, after the baby's born, and there's angels singing, and wise men bringing gifts, it's easy to go, thanks, Lord. Thanks, Lord. Much harder to be thankful in the journey, isn't it? Here's the challenge today on Thanksgiving. Have you found joy in your journey, both in the good and the hard, in the easy and the difficult, in the times of wealth and poverty, health and sickness? Because when you find that joy, when you're able to give thanks in a victory that's already been won, it changes the way you take that next step in the battle every time. Because you know you have a God that's going with you. And today's defeat might simply God steering into tomorrow's victory. You just haven't seen it yet. But am I one today ready, no matter what circumstance or situation? You've got me, God. Thank you. Thank you that you're here. Thank you that you're in the midst of my broken relationships, in the midst of my broken family, in the midst of our dysfunction. Thank you. And thank you that you're at work. Thank you that even though I missed the mark so many times, you're gracious. You're gracious. Thank you that you're forgiving. Thank you that today you've got this. I don't always understand. I won't always understand. But there's one thing I can do, and that's sit in the joy of the Lord, praising his holy name, entering his courts with thanksgiving.